The timer on Ehud Barak's wristwatch read 22:11, April 9th, 1973. He stood on a darkened Beirut street wearing a brown wig, foundation makeup, and a blouse over a concealed beretta. His fingernails were painted. In 90 seconds, 3 explosive charges would detonate simultaneously across this neighborhood. The woman beside him was actually Amiram Levine. Blonde wig, lipstick, heels that clicked on the pavement. They walked arm in arm like a couple returning from dinner. Lebanese civilians passed them without a second glance. Under the wig, under the makeup, under the civilian clothing, these men carried enough firepower to start a war. The mission clock was running. 60 seconds. A white sedan rolled past, Mossad driver at the wheel, checking the perimeter one final time. 45 seconds. Barak's hand moved inside the handbag, fingers wrapping around the pistol grip. 30 seconds. They approached the apartment building at 74 Rue Verdun. Security guard visible through the glass entrance. The man was armed. 15 seconds. Levine's free hand slipped to his concealed Uzi. 10 seconds. They separated, dropping the civilian pretense, weapons coming up from handbags and beneath jackets. 5 seconds. Barak's earpiece crackled. All teams ready. 3 seconds. He pressed the transmit button once. The signal. 22:13. The first explosion tore through Kamal Adwan's apartment door 3 blocks away. This was Operation Spring of Youth, the most audacious assassination raid Israel had ever attempted. The target list included 3 men: Mohammed Youssef al-Najjar, operations chief for Black September, the group responsible for murdering 11 Israeli athletes at Munich 5 months earlier; Kamal Adwan, PLO chief of operations, architect of multiple cross-border attacks; Kamal Nasser, PLO spokesman and executive committee member. All 3 lived in heavily fortified apartments in central Beirut, surrounded by armed guards, protected by Lebanese security forces, operating in a city where Israeli commandos had no legal authority, no extraction support, no margin for error. The planners faced an impossible equation: penetrate a hostile capital, locate targets in separate buildings, execute 3 simultaneous raids, extract the teams through armed resistance, and return to Israeli territory before the Lebanese army mobilized. Standard assassination methods were rejected. Mossad had proposed lone gunmen, car bombs, poisoning, the traditional tools. Israeli military command said no. These targets were too valuable, too symbolic, too embedded in the Palestinian resistance structure. A quiet death would trigger waves of retaliatory attacks and allow other leaders to vanish. The strike needed to be public, devastating, and absolutely certain. September 5th, 1972. Munich Olympic Village. 4:30 a.m. 8 men in tracksuits scaled the perimeter fence. They carried AK-47 assault rifles in duffel bags. By 4:45, they had forced entry into 31 Konolistrasse, the Israeli athletes' quarters. Wrestling coach Moshe Weinberg was shot immediately when he fought back. Weightlifter Yosef Romano was killed defending his teammates. 9 athletes were taken hostage. The demands came at 5 down a.m. Release 234 prisoners held in Israeli jails. The deadline, noon. West German authorities negotiated extensions. The terrorists agreed to transport by helicopter to a waiting aircraft. The Israeli government refused to negotiate. At 10:30 p.m., 2 helicopters landed at Fürstenfeldbruck Air Base. German police snipers were in position. The plan was immediate assault. The execution was catastrophic. No radio communication between sniper teams. No armored vehicles on site. Inadequate lighting. The terrorists detected the ambush. One threw a grenade into a helicopter. Another opened fire with automatic weapons at point-blank range inside the second helicopter. By 12:30 a.m. on September 6th, all 11 Israeli hostages were dead. 5 terrorists were killed. 3 were captured. Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir convened an emergency cabinet meeting on September 8th. The decision was unanimous. Find everyone responsible and kill them. The operation received a code name, Wrath of God. Mossad was tasked with creating the target list, locating the individuals, and coordinating with military special forces for executions beyond the reach of conventional intelligence operations. February 1973. Mossad's Caesarea unit, the division handling special operations and paramilitary actions, delivered a critical intelligence package to military headquarters. They had located Mohammed Youssef al-Najjar in Beirut, 74, Rue Verdun, Apartment 3. Architectural blueprints of the building were obtained. Guard rotation schedules documented. Vehicle patterns recorded. Within 2 weeks, they had similar intelligence on Kamal Adwan, 79 Rue Verdun, 6th floor. 3 guards minimum at all times. Kamal Nasser's location came next. Different building, same street, ground floor apartment behind reinforced doors. Ehud Barak received the intelligence file on February 20th. He commanded Sayeret Matkal, Israel's elite special forces unit, answering directly to the Chief of General Staff. The unit specialized in operations beyond enemy lines, hostage rescue, and counter-terrorism. Barak was 31 years old. He had led Operation Isotope 1 year earlier, the 1972 mission to rescue 97 hostages from Sabina Flight 571 at Lod Airport. That operation succeeded without losing a single hostage. This mission would be exponentially more complex. The initial planning sessions identified 3 critical obstacles. First, distance. Beirut was 120 kilometers from the Israeli border by land, but crossing through southern Lebanon meant passing through multiple Fatah-controlled villages and Lebanese army checkpoints. Helicopters lacked the range for insertion and extraction. Sea insertion was the only option. Second, urban environment. These were not isolated targets in rural safe houses. They lived in apartment buildings in Beirut's Verdun district, a wealthy neighborhood with constant civilian traffic, Lebanese police patrols, and PLO security personnel. Collateral damage was inevitable. Third, extraction timing. The teams would have limited time before Lebanese military forces mobilized. Best case estimate: 25 minutes from first explosion to overwhelming response. Worst case, 15 minutes. Barak assembled the core team in early March. Sayeret Matkal would provide 3 assault teams, 9 operators per team. Shayatet 13, Israeli naval commandos, would handle sea transport and beach security. Additional paratroop units would create diversions by striking PLO offices and weapons facilities elsewhere in Beirut, drawing security forces away from the main targets. Mossad's Caesarea unit would provide ground transportation and serve as guides once the teams were ashore. Total force: approximately 65 combat personnel. Training commenced March 10th at an undisclosed facility in northern Israel. Engineers constructed full-scale mock-ups of the 3 apartment buildings using the architectural plans Mossad had obtained. Every door, every stairwell, every window was replicated exactly. The teams rehearsed the assault sequence repeatedly. Explosive breaching techniques were refined to minimize structural collapse while maximizing shock effect. Each operator memorized the interior layout of their target. They practiced in daylight, in darkness, with smoke simulation, with blank fire weapons creating realistic auditory conditions. By April 1st, each team could execute their assault sequence in under 4 minutes, from breach to extraction. The disguise concept emerged from the transportation problem. Once ashore, the teams would need to move 3 kilometers through central Beirut to reach Rue Verdun. They would be traveling in civilian vehicles. Mossad would provide rental cars. But armed commandos in military gear would trigger immediate response from any Lebanese security patrol they encountered. Someone proposed civilian clothing. Barak pushed further. Couples, male-female pairs walking together, would draw no attention in this neighborhood. The problem was, the unit had no female operators. The solution was theatrical: makeup, wigs, women's clothing. Several commandos underwent basic disguise training with Mossad specialists. They practiced walking in women's shoes, maintaining the posture, keeping weapons concealed under blouses and in handbags. Ehud Barak would wear a brown wig and dress as a woman. Amiram Levine, his deputy, would be blonde. Mossad deployed a female agent to Beirut in February under the codename Yael. Her real name was Elaine Steiner. Born in Canada, raised in New Jersey, she emigrated to Israel after a failed marriage. Mossad recruited her for her language skills, her appearance, she could pass as European or American, and her ability to operate alone for extended periods. Her cover: freelance scriptwriter researching locations for a film production. She rented an apartment with direct line of sight to Kamal Adwan's building. For 6 weeks, she documented patterns. What time did the guards change shifts? Which vehicles belonged to PLO security? When did Adwan leave his apartment? When did he return? She photographed the building entrance, the street layout, the nearest intersections. She identified the optimal approach routes for the assault teams and located potential obstacles. A construction barrier 2 blocks east that would force vehicles into a detour. A Lebanese army post 3 blocks north that would respond within minutes of hearing gunfire. March 30th. Yael transmitted an urgent message to Tel Aviv. One of the targets was changing routine. Mohammed Youssef al-Najjar had increased his security detail from 2 guards to 4. The reason was unclear. Possibly he had received intelligence about a threat. Possibly it was random precaution. The operational window was closing. If al-Najjar went underground or relocated, the entire mission would collapse. The decision came from the top: execute within 2 weeks. April 6th. Final operational briefing at Haifa Naval Base. Barak addressed the assault teams. The mission timeline was explained minute by minute. Israeli missile boats would depart Haifa at 16 Maisk on April 9th. Transit time to Beirut coast, 4 hours. Arrival offshore, 20 Zeish. The teams would transfer to Zodiac inflatable boats and make landfall 3 kilometers north of Beirut proper at 21 Drir. Mossad agents would be waiting on the beach with 6 rental cars, 4 sedans for the assault teams, 2 vans for the diversion teams. Drive time to Rue Verdun, 12 minutes. The assault would commence at 22:13 precisely. All 3 teams would breach simultaneously. Mission duration inside the apartments. Maximum 5 minutes per target. Extraction would reverse the route. Vehicles back to the beach. Zodiacs back to the missile boats. Departure from Lebanese waters by 23 Rhine. Total time on Lebanese soil: 2 hours. The contingency plans covered equipment failure, vehicle breakdown, unexpected armed resistance, and wounded personnel. Each team had designated fallback positions if the primary extraction route was compromised. Israeli Air Force jets would be on station offshore to provide cover if Lebanese forces attempted naval pursuit. Artillery units at the northern border were positioned to fire support missions if the teams had to escape overland. Nobody expected to use these options. Nobody wanted to. April 9th, 1545. 3 Tsar-class missile boats departed Haifa port. These were fast attack craft, 45 meters long, armed with Gabriel anti-ship missiles and 76 mm deck guns. Their normal mission was engaging enemy naval vessels and providing coastal bombardment support. Today, they were transports. The boats reached their position 7 kilometers off the Beirut coast at 20:03, 3 minutes behind schedule. Sea state was calm, visibility good. No Lebanese patrol boats detected in the area. At 20:15, the Commandos transferred to the Zodiacs. 6 inflatable boats, heavily loaded with weapons, ammunition, explosive charges, and personnel. Shayatet 13 naval commandos manned the outboard motors. The boats made the run to shore in 18 minutes, landing at 20:33 on a stretch of beach between 2 unlit sections of coastline. The teams secured the landing zone quickly, no civilians in the immediate area. The Mossad vehicles arrived within 2 minutes. Drivers were Caesarea unit operatives who had been living in Beirut under various covers for months. They knew the city's street patterns, the traffic rhythms, the locations of every police station and military post. The transformation happened on the beach. Combat gear was cached in waterproof bags that would remain with the Shayatet 13 security element. The assault team members changed into civilian clothing. Wigs were fitted. Makeup was applied quickly but carefully, enough to pass casual inspection, and so much it looked theatrical. Weapons were concealed. Barak checked his appearance in a car's side mirror. The wig was secure. The blouse covered his tactical vest. The handbag held a Beretta 9mm pistol with 3 spare magazines. He looked like a middle-aged woman returning from a social event. Levine adjusted his blonde wig and practiced walking in the low heels one more time. The other operators paired up, some as male-female couples, others as small groups that could be mistaken for friends or colleagues. 21:04. The vehicles departed the beach. 2 sedans headed for Rue Verdun carrying the assault teams. 1 van proceeded to the PLO's popular front headquarters on the opposite side of the city. That team would create the diversion. Another van headed to a Fatah weapons workshop in a different district. The remaining sedans stayed with the extraction point, ready to respond if complications arose. The drive through Beirut was surreal. The Commandos sat in the back seats of rental cars, watching civilian traffic pass, seeing people walking dogs, seeing restaurants with outdoor seating. They were 90 minutes away from killing 3 men, but the city around them had no idea. Barak sat in the front passenger seat of the lead sedan. The Mossad driver navigated calmly, obeying traffic signals, maintaining normal speed. They passed a Lebanese police car at an intersection. The officer glanced at them. No reaction. The disguise was working. 21:47. The vehicles reached Rue Verdun and dispersed to their designated positions. Team 1, Barak's team, parked 3 blocks from Mohammed Youssef al-Najjar's building. They would walk the final distance. Team 2 positioned near Kamal Adwan's building. Team 3 approached Kamal Nasser's apartment. Each team conducted final weapons checks, synchronized watches, and confirmed radio communication. The diversion teams reached their targets and confirmed ready status. Everything depended on simultaneous execution. If one team breached early, the other targets would be alerted and potentially escape. If one team breached late, Lebanese security forces would already be responding to the first explosion. 22:00. Barak's team exited their vehicle and began walking. 4 pairs of couples moving along the sidewalk. Barak and Levine in front, two more pairs behind at staggered intervals. They walked slowly, naturally, mimicking the pace of people who lived in this neighborhood. They passed civilian pedestrians. They passed parked cars. They passed the entrance to a restaurant where diners sat at outdoor tables. Nobody paid attention to them. The psychological effect of the disguise was perfect. People saw what they expected to see, and they expected to see couples out for an evening walk, not Israeli commandos preparing to execute a targeted assassination. 22:08. The teams were in position. Barak stood 30 meters from al-Najjar's building entrance. He could see one guard inside the lobby, visible through the glass doors. Second guard would be upstairs outside the apartment door. Radio check confirmed Team 2 and Team 3 were ready. The diversion teams reported ready. Barak pressed his transmit button twice. 60-second countdown initiated. He resumed walking, closing the distance to the entrance. Levine stayed beside him, hand inside his handbag where the Uzi submachine gun waited. The other pairs moved into their assigned positions. One pair would breach the entrance and neutralize the lobby guard. Second pair would secure the stairwell. Third pair would conduct the actual assault on the apartment. Fourth pair would provide external security and evacuation support. 22:09:30, 30 seconds. Barak reached the building entrance. The guard inside looked up, saw a woman and her companion approaching the door. No alarm, no weapon drawn. 15 seconds. Barak's hand moved inside the handbag. 10 seconds. Levine's hand wrapped around the Uzi. 5 seconds. They were at the door. The guard stood, possibly preparing to open it for them. 3 seconds. Barak's earpiece, all teams confirming final ready status. 2 seconds. He pulled the Beretta from the handbag. 1 second. 22:09:59. Levine kicked the glass door. The guard's hand moved toward his holstered weapon. 22:10:01. Barak fired twice, center mass. The guard collapsed. The glass door was already broken. The team rushed through. Lobby secure, stairwell team moving. Second and third floors clear. Fourth floor, al-Najjar's apartment. 2 guards outside the door, both armed, both reacting to the sound of gunfire from below. The assault pair came up the stairs firing. The guards returned fire. The stairwell erupted in overlapping gunfire, muzzle flashes, ricochets off concrete walls. One guard went down immediately. The second retreated toward the apartment door, firing his AK-47 in controlled bursts. He hit one of the Israeli commandos in the shoulder. Non-fatal, but the operator was out of the fight. The second Israeli operator killed the guard with a 3-round burst to the head. 22:10:47. The apartment door was steel reinforced. The assault team placed a frame charge. Shaped explosive designed to blow the locking mechanism without collapsing the surrounding structure. 3-second fuse. The charge detonated. The door blew inward. Smoke filled the entrance. The commandos entered through the smoke, weapons up, scanning for targets. Al-Najjar appeared from a side room holding a pistol. He fired once, the round missed. The lead commando fired a controlled burst. Al-Najjar was hit multiple times in the chest. He fell backward into the room he had emerged from. The team cleared the rest of the apartment. Wife and children in the bedrooms, screaming, terrified, unharmed. The commandos grabbed documents from Al-Najjar's desk, pulled papers from drawers, stuffed everything into a canvas bag. Intelligence collection complete. Time in apartment, 2 minutes, 14 seconds. Extraction initiated. Simultaneously, 3 blocks away, Team 2 executed their assault on Kamal Adwan's building. The approach was identical. Disguised entry, rapid breach, overwhelming firepower. Adwan's building had 3 guards, 2 outside the main entrance, 1 patrolling the interior hallway. The exterior guards were killed in the initial assault with suppressed weapons, 2 shots each. Both guards down before they could react or transmit a warning. The interior guard heard the bodies fall, drew his weapon, and moved toward the entrance to investigate. He was shot by the entry team as he reached the door. The assault pair moved to the 6th floor. Adwan's apartment door was reinforced like Al-Najjar's. Same solution. Frame charge, 3-second delay, detonation. The explosion was louder in this building because the stairwell acoustics amplified it. The door blew open. The Commandos entered. Adwan was in the hallway, armed with a pistol, firing at the entry point. His rounds hit the door frame and the wall. The Commandos returned fire from behind cover. Adwan was hit in the arm and torso. He fell, but continued trying to aim his weapon. A second burst killed him. The team searched the apartment, collected documents, and photographed materials they couldn't carry. Adwan's family was in the back bedroom, unharmed but in shock. Extraction time: 2 minutes, 31 seconds. Team 3 hit Kamal Nasser's apartment on a different schedule because his building layout required a different approach. His ground floor apartment meant no stairwell to control, but it also meant street-level windows that could allow him to escape into the alley behind the building. The team split. 4 operators breached the front entrance, while 2 moved to the rear alley to cut off escape routes. The front door was blown at 22:10:15, 15 seconds after the other 2 assaults commenced. This timing was deliberate. By the time Nasser's guards heard the distant explosions from the other buildings, the breaching charge was already detonating at their location, giving them no time to process the threat or organize defense. Nasser's apartment had 1 guard inside. He was killed in the doorway by the entry team. Nasser himself was in a back room, attempting to escape through a window. The rear security team saw him climbing out and shouted for him to stop. He ignored the command and continued climbing. He was shot in the back, fell back into the room, and was killed by a follow-up shot from the interior assault team. Documents collected, room photographed. Extraction time: 1 minute 58 seconds, 22:13:45. All 3 assault teams were out of the buildings and moving to their vehicles. The diversionary teams had executed their missions simultaneously. The popular front headquarters had been hit with explosive charges and automatic weapons fire, causing massive structural damage and killing an estimated 12 PLO members inside. The weapons workshop had been destroyed with incendiary grenades. These attacks drew Lebanese police and PLO security forces to the opposite side of the city, exactly as intended. But the sounds of multiple explosions and sustained gunfire across Beirut had triggered a citywide alert. Lebanese internal security forces were mobilizing. Every police station in the city received orders to establish checkpoints on major routes and begin searching for the attackers. 22:17. The assault vehicles were moving back toward the extraction point. The Mossad drivers navigated side streets, avoiding main thoroughfares where checkpoints would be established first. They encountered civilian traffic, people fleeing the sound of explosions, people trying to reach family members, people simply confused about what was happening. The Commandos remained in their disguises during the drive, but had weapons ready. If they encountered a police checkpoint, they would have to fight through it. They monitored police radio frequencies through a scanner one of the Mossad drivers carried. The broadcasts were chaotic. Units reporting to different locations, commanders demanding status updates, conflicting information about how many attacks had occurred and where. 22:31. First complication. Team 2's vehicle approached an intersection and found a Lebanese army truck blocking the road. 4 soldiers were dismounting, setting up a checkpoint. The driver had 2 options: turn around, which would look suspicious and likely trigger pursuit, or proceed through and hope the soldiers didn't stop them. He chose to proceed. The vehicle approached the checkpoint. One soldier raised his hand, signaling them to stop. The driver slowed, but did not stop completely, calling out in Arabic that they were trying to get home, that they lived just 2 blocks ahead. The soldier hesitated. In that moment of hesitation, the driver accelerated past the checkpoint. The soldiers shouted. One raised his rifle. The Mossad driver made a hard right turn onto a side street before any shots were fired. The soldiers ran back to their truck to pursue. But by the time they were mobile, the Israeli vehicle had disappeared into the residential streets. 22 and 38. The vehicles reached the beach area. The Shayatet 13 security element had maintained the perimeter. No civilian interference. No Lebanese patrol boats detected offshore. The Commandos stripped off the disguises, retrieved their cached combat gear, and loaded into the Zodiacs. One operator had been wounded in the Al-Najjar assault, shoulder injury, but he was mobile and could make the extraction. The boats launched at 22:41, 6 minutes ahead of schedule. The outboard motors were open to maximum throttle. The ride was rough. The boats pounded across the waves, spray soaking everyone, but speed was more important than comfort. Lebanese coastal defense forces were certainly being alerted. If patrol boats were dispatched, the Zodiacs would be vulnerable. 22:59. The Zodiacs reached the missile boats. The Commandos climbed aboard, equipment was secured, and the boats turned west, away from Lebanese waters. Israeli Air Force F-4 Phantom jets were orbiting 40 kilometers offshore, ready to engage if Lebanese or Syrian aircraft scrambled. No engagement occurred. The missile boats reached international waters at 23:14 and increased to maximum speed. By 23:45, they were beyond any possible pursuit, and the mission was confirmed successful. All 3 primary targets eliminated. Significant intelligence material recovered. Total Israeli casualties: 1 wounded, none life-threatening. Estimated enemy casualties: 23 killed, including the 3 primary targets and 20 additional PLO members and guards. The intelligence haul from the 3 apartments was significant. Al-Najjar's documents included operational plans for attacks in Israel, communications with PLO factions in other countries, and financial records showing funding sources for Black September operations. Adwan's materials revealed the organizational structure of PLO Operations Division, names of operatives in Europe and the Middle East, and details of weapons procurement networks. Nasser's apartment yielded propaganda materials and communications with sympathetic governments. Mossad analysts spent weeks processing the material. Several operations were disrupted based on the intelligence. Multiple operatives were identified and subsequently tracked or eliminated in follow-up operations. The propaganda value was equally important. Israel demonstrated it could strike anywhere, at any time, regardless of security measures or geographic distance. The aftermath in Beirut was chaos. Lebanese authorities initially had conflicting reports about the attacker's identity. Some witnesses described seeing European-looking couples in the area before the attacks. Others reported seeing armed men in civilian clothing. The PLO issued statements claiming the attacks were carried out by Lebanese traitors working for Israel. They refused to accept that Israeli commandos had penetrated central Beirut so easily. Lebanese newspapers published photographs of the destroyed PLO headquarters and the apartment buildings where the assassinations occurred. The images showed significant damage: blown-out doors, bullet-scarred walls, blood on the floors. Lebanese government officials were embarrassed. Their security forces had failed to detect or prevent a major foreign military operation in their capital. PLO leadership was shaken. If 3 senior commanders could be killed in their homes despite heavy security, no one was safe. Several high-ranking PLO members immediately relocated to different cities or went underground. April 11, 1973. Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir addressed the Knesset. She did not explicitly confirm Israel's responsibility for the Beirut operation, but her statement made the connection clear. Those who murder Israelis should know they will be pursued relentlessly wherever they hide, regardless of how well they are protected. The statement was met with applause from most members of the Knesset, though some left-wing parties criticized the operation for causing civilian casualties and potentially triggering escalated conflict. International reaction was divided. The United States privately condemned the operation as a violation of Lebanese sovereignty, but took no formal action. European governments issued statements expressing concern about Israel's extraterritorial operations. Arab governments universally condemned the attacks and called for United Nations action against Israel. The UN Security Council held an emergency session on April 14th, but took no binding action due to a U.S. veto of any proposed sanctions. The operational techniques demonstrated in Spring of Youth became a template for future Israeli Special Forces operations. The use of detailed intelligence preparation, the integration of Mossad and military assets, the emphasis on simultaneous multi-target strikes to prevent warning, and the creative use of disguise and deception became standard elements in Israeli counterterrorism doctrine. Ehud Barak's career advanced significantly following the operation's success. He eventually became Chief of General Staff in 1991 and Prime Minister of Israel in 1999. Throughout his career, he rarely discussed Operation Spring of Youth in detail. But when asked about it in later years, he emphasized the operational precision and the risks the Commandos accepted. Amiram Levine, the blonde-wigged deputy commander, continued in special operations leadership roles and later became head of the Israeli prison service. The Mossad agent codenamed Yael was extracted from Beirut shortly after the operation. She had been compromised. Lebanese security services were investigating foreign nationals who had rented apartments near the attack sites. She returned to Israel and continued working for Mossad in other capacities, though never again in such a high-exposure field role. Her identity remained secret for decades. She died in 2015 at age 84. The tactical innovations were studied by special forces units worldwide. The disguise technique, male operators dressed as women, was analyzed in military training courses as an example of effective operational deception. The key lesson was psychological. Security forces and civilian observers see what they expect to see. A couple walking arms in arm through a wealthy neighborhood generates zero suspicion even if they are carrying concealed weapons and are minutes away from executing an assault. The technique required confidence from the operators, attention to detail in the disguise preparation, and a cultural understanding of how couples behave in the target environment. All 3 elements were present in the Spring of Youth operation. The technological aspects of the mission were relatively low-tech by modern standards, but were sophisticated for 1973. The explosive charges used for door breaching were precision-shaped charges developed specifically for this type of mission. They had to generate enough force to blow a reinforced door without causing excessive structural damage that could harm the assault team or create obstacles to movement. The radio communications between teams were encrypted using Israeli-developed systems that prevented Lebanese forces from monitoring the tactical coordination. The Zodiac inflatable boats used for insertion and extraction were a compromise between speed, load capacity, and radar signature. They were small enough to avoid easy detection, but large enough to transport fully equipped commandos in rough sea conditions. The missile boats that transported the force offshore were Sa'ar-class fast attack craft, relatively new designs that had proven effective in naval engagements during the earlier stages of the Israeli-Egyptian conflict. Their speed and defensive armament made them ideal for this type of operation, where rapid transit and the ability to fight off coastal patrol boats were critical requirements. The intelligence preparation phase had been the longest and most resource-intensive part of the operation. Mossad had been tracking the 3 targets for months before the mission was approved. The intelligence came from multiple sources: signals intelligence intercepts of PLO communications, human intelligence from agents operating in Lebanon and other Arab countries, surveillance photography from agents like Yael who lived near the targets, and information from informants within the PLO or Lebanese security services. The architectural plans for the apartment buildings were obtained through a combination of legitimate research, building permit records that were public documents, and covert photography of the building exteriors and interiors. Mossad agents posed as potential renters or buyers to gain access to similar apartments in the same buildings, photographing layouts and measuring dimensions. Guard schedules were documented through weeks of surveillance, noting when shifts changed, how many guards were present at different times of day, what weapons they carried, and how alert they appeared to be. This level of detail allowed the assault teams to plan with precision and reduce the chances of encountering unexpected obstacles during the mission. The selection of the 3 targets was not random. Mohammed Youssef al-Najjar was identified as the senior operations coordinator for Black September. Intelligence indicated he had been directly involved in planning the Munich massacre, though he had not been one of the terrorists on site. His role was logistical and strategic, arranging weapons, coordinating safe houses, managing communications, and providing funds. After Munich, he continued planning attacks against Israeli and Jewish targets in Europe. Kamal Adwan was the PLO's chief of operations, responsible for attacks originating from Lebanon into northern Israel. His organization conducted rocket attacks, cross-border raids, and attempted infiltrations. Israeli military intelligence considered him one of the most effective operational commanders in the PLO. Kamal Nasser was the spokesman and a member of the PLO Executive Committee. His role was less operational and more political, but he was targeted because of his visibility and his role in articulating PLO strategy and justifying attacks against Israeli civilians. The decision to include him in the target list was partially symbolic. Israel wanted to demonstrate that even senior political figures in the PLO were vulnerable. The diversionary attacks were essential to the mission's success. By striking the popular front headquarters and the weapons workshop simultaneously with the assassinations, the Israeli planners created confusion and divided Lebanese and PLO security responses. When the first explosions occurred, Lebanese forces had to decide where to send their limited resources. Multiple sites under attack meant that reinforcements could not be concentrated at any single location. This gave the assault teams additional time to execute their missions and withdraw before overwhelming force arrived. The popular front headquarters attack was particularly destructive. The building was hit with both explosive charges and sustained automatic weapons fire from the Israeli paratroop team. The structure suffered major damage and multiple casualties. The weapons workshop was destroyed with incendiary grenades that ignited stored ammunition and explosives, causing secondary explosions that demolished the facility and killed everyone inside. These attacks generated enough noise, fire, and destruction that they dominated initial reports and drew attention away from the targeted assassinations on Rue Verdun. The extraction phase was the most vulnerable part of the operation. Once the attacks commenced, the The clock started counting down to the arrival of Lebanese military forces with the capacity to trap and destroy the Israeli teams. The 3-kilometer drive from Rue Verdun to the beach extraction point normally took 8 minutes in regular traffic. Under emergency conditions, with possible checkpoints and pursuing vehicles, the planners allocated 15 minutes. The actual extraction took 13 minutes for the first vehicles and 17 for the last, slightly longer than planned, but still within acceptable parameters. The delay was caused by the improvised checkpoint that Team 2 encountered. The decision by the Mossad driver to accelerate through the checkpoint rather than stop or turn away was a split-second judgment that proved correct. If they had stopped, the soldiers would have inspected the vehicle and discovered armed commandos. If they had turned away, the soldiers would have pursued and likely radioed ahead to establish additional checkpoints. By accelerating through and immediately turning into the residential streets, the driver created enough confusion and delay that pursuit was ineffective. The beach extraction site had been selected months in advance during the planning phase. Mossad conducted reconnaissance of the entire coastline north of Beirut, looking for locations that met specific criteria: accessible from the water in Zodiac boats, close enough to the city for rapid vehicle transit, far enough from residential areas to minimize civilian witnesses, and with terrain that allowed the Shayatet 13 security element to establish a defensive perimeter. The selected site met all requirements. It was a stretch of undeveloped beach between 2 rocky headlands, not visible from the nearest road, and approximately 3 kilometers from the northern edge of Beirut's urban sprawl. The beach had been surveyed multiple times. Mossad agents visited during daylight and at night, measuring distances, identifying landmarks that would be visible from offshore, and confirming that no regular police or military patrols passed through the area. The Shayatet 13 team that secured the landing zone during the operation maintained position for the entire mission duration, ready to repel any Lebanese forces that might discover the extraction point. The role of the Israeli missile boats was primarily transport, but they were also prepared for combat if necessary. The Sa'ar-class boats carried Gabriel anti-ship missiles and 76-meter rapid-fire cannons. If Lebanese patrol boats had attempted to intercept the extraction, the Israeli missile boats would have engaged and destroyed them. The rules of engagement authorized the boat commanders to use all available weapons to protect the extraction force. No Lebanese naval forces approached during the operation, but Syrian naval units were detected on radar approximately 60 kilometers to the north during the extraction phase. Israeli Air Force fighters moved to intercept positions between the Syrian vessels and the extraction site, ready to engage if the Syrians turned south. The Syrian vessels maintained their course and did not approach. Whether they were unaware of the Israeli operation or chose not to engage is unclear from declassified records. YouTube the wounded Israeli commando who took a round in the shoulder during the Al-Najjar assault was treated on board the missile boat during the return trip to Haifa. The injury was serious, but not life-threatening. The bullet had passed through muscle tissue without hitting bone or major blood vessels. The operator was hospitalized at Rambam Medical Center in Haifa upon arrival and underwent surgery to clean the wound and repair damaged tissue. He made a full recovery and returned to active duty with Sayeret Matkal 6 months later. This was the only Israeli casualty of the operation, a remarkably low number given the intensity of the combat and the multiple guard forces encountered. The low casualty rate was attributed to several factors. The element of surprise gave the assault teams a critical advantage in the initial seconds of each engagement. The explosive breaching techniques created shock and disorientation among the defenders. The operators' training and marksmanship were superior to the PLO guards. and the body armor worn by the Commandos provided protection against several rounds that hit them during the firefights. The immediate reaction within the Israeli military and intelligence community was celebratory. Operation Spring of Youth was considered one of the most successful special operations ever conducted by Israeli forces. The mission had achieved all primary objectives, recovered valuable intelligence, and demonstrated operational capabilities that sent a clear message to Israel's adversaries. The operation was also seen as a morale boost for Israeli citizens and military personnel who were still processing the trauma of the Munich massacre. The successful execution of the mission conveyed that Israel would not accept attacks against its citizens without retaliation, and that retaliation would be precise, devastating, and reach anywhere. However, there were critics within Israel who questioned the operation on legal and ethical grounds. Some argued that the assassinations violated international law, particularly the principle of sovereignty that prohibited one nation from conducting military operations within another nation's territory without consent. Others raised concerns about the civilian casualties. Several Lebanese security personnel and at least 2 civilian neighbors were killed during the assault and diversion operations. The critics argued that targeted assassinations, while emotionally satisfying, did not address the underlying political conflict and might actually increase the cycle of violence by provoking retaliatory attacks. These criticisms were generally a minority position within Israel at the time, but they reflected ongoing debates about the ethics and effectiveness of targeted killing as a counterterrorism strategy. The PLO's response to the operation took several forms. Publicly, they issued statements condemning the attacks and vowing revenge. Privately, they undertook a comprehensive review of their security procedures and organizational structure. The fact that Israeli intelligence had obtained detailed information about the locations and habits of 3 senior commanders indicated a serious security breach. The PLO leadership suspected there were informants within their organization or within Lebanese security services. A paranoid internal investigation was launched, resulting in the detention and interrogation of dozens of individuals suspected of collaborating with Israeli intelligence. Several people were executed on suspicion of espionage, though it's unclear whether any of them actually provided information to Israel or were simply victims of paranoia and internal political rivalries. The investigations and purges disrupted PLO operations for months, which was an additional benefit for Israel beyond the immediate impact of the assassinations. Operationally, the PLO made significant changes after Spring of Youth. Senior commanders were instructed to change residences frequently, to avoid establishing predictable routines, and to increase their personal security details. The organization invested in better communication security, recognizing that signals intelligence had likely played a role in Israeli targeting. The PLO also pressured Lebanese authorities to increase security measures for Palestinian leaders living in Lebanon. Though the Lebanese government's willingness and ability to provide such protection was limited, Lebanon was already dealing with its own internal political fragmentation and did not want to become more deeply involved in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The changes the PLO implemented made future Israeli operations more difficult, but did not prevent them entirely. Over the following years, Israel continued to conduct targeted assassinations and raids into Lebanon, though none matched the scope and audacity of Operation Spring of Youth. The international diplomatic fallout was managed primarily by the United States. The U.S. government publicly called for restraint from all parties and expressed concern about violations of Lebanese sovereignty. But privately, U.S. officials acknowledged to their Israeli counterparts that they understood Israel's security concerns and the desire for retaliation after Munich. The relationship between the U.S. and Israel was strengthening during this period. driven by Cold War dynamics and shared concerns about Soviet influence in the Middle East. The U.S. provided diplomatic cover at the United Nations, vetoing a Security Council resolution that would have formally condemned Israel for the operation and potentially imposed sanctions. This pattern of U.S. diplomatic support for Israeli military actions, even when those actions violated international legal norms, became a consistent feature of the relationship. European governments took a more critical stance. Several European nations issued formal diplomatic protests to Israel, arguing that the operation set a dangerous precedent for extraterritorial assassinations and violated the sovereignty of Lebanon. France was particularly vocal in its criticism, with French officials calling the operation state-sponsored terrorism and demanding that Israel be held accountable. The French government was concerned not only about the principle of sovereignty, but also about the potential for similar operations to be conducted in Europe. Several Palestinian leaders lived in Paris and other European cities, and French security services worried that Israel might target them as well. These concerns proved to be well-founded. Israel did conduct operations in Europe as part of the broader Wrath of God campaign, including the mistaken killing of a Moroccan waiter in Norway in 1973. An operation that went wrong when Israeli agents misidentified their target. The lessons learned from Operation Spring of Youth influenced Special Operations doctrine far beyond Israel. The operation demonstrated several principles that were studied and adopted by military forces around the world. The value of detailed intelligence preparation, the effectiveness of simultaneous multi-target strikes to prevent warning and disperse enemy responses, the use of diversionary attacks to create confusion and delay response forces, the importance of rehearsal and precise timing, and the creative use of deception to gain access to secure areas. The disguise technique received particular attention in military training courses. Instructors analyzed the psychological principles that made the disguise effective and discussed how similar techniques could be adapted to different operational contexts. The key insight was that effective deception doesn't require perfect disguises. It requires understanding what the observers expect to see and providing visual cues that match those expectations. YouTube. The operation also highlighted the importance of joint operations between intelligence and military forces. Mossad provided the intelligence, the surveillance, the ground transportation, and the local expertise. Sayeret Matkal and other military units provided the combat capability. Neither organization could have executed the mission alone. The coordination between them was not perfect. There were communication gaps and moments of confusion, but it was effective enough to achieve the mission objectives. This model of intelligence military integration became a hallmark of Israeli counterterrorism operations and was studied by other nations developing their own counterterrorism capabilities. The personal stories of the operators who participated in Spring of Youth remained largely classified for decades. Most of the Commandos never spoke publicly about their role in the operation. Ehud Barak was the notable exception, though even he rarely discussed operational details. In interviews years later, he described the tension of walking through Beirut in disguise, the surreal experience of wearing women's clothing while preparing for lethal combat, and the relief when all teams successfully extracted. He emphasized that the operation succeeded because of the people involved, the operators who trained relentlessly, the Mossad agents who gathered intelligence at great personal risk, and the planners who anticipated problems and developed contingencies. He also acknowledged the luck factor. If the Lebanese checkpoint had been more heavily manned, if a PLO security patrol had happened to pass by during the assault, if the sea conditions had been rougher, making the boat extraction more difficult, Any of these factors could have turned success into disaster. The 3 assassinated PLO leaders were buried in Beirut with full honors. Thousands of people attended the funerals, which became public demonstrations of support for the Palestinian cause. Yasser Arafat, who had been in Cairo during the attacks and thus avoided potential targeting, gave a speech at the funeral calling the fallen leaders martyrs and vowing that their deaths would not be in vain. He framed the assassinations as evidence of Israeli aggression and used them to rally international support for the Palestinian cause. The funerals received extensive coverage in Arab media, with graphic photographs of the victims and emotional footage of their families grieving. The coverage served PLO propaganda purposes by portraying Israel as a ruthless aggressor willing to kill political leaders in their homes. However, it also had an unintended effect. Some Palestinians privately questioned why their leaders had been so easily killed despite supposed security measures, creating doubt about the PLO's competence. In the years following Spring of Youth, similar operations continued. Israel assassinated other Palestinian leaders in various locations: Beirut, Paris, Athens, Rome, and other cities where PLO members operated or sought refuge. Some operations were successful, others failed or resulted in misidentification of targets. The most notorious failure was the Lillehammer affair in July 1973, just 3 months after Spring of Youth. A Mossad team in Norway mistook a Moroccan waiter for Ali Hassan Salameh, one of the architects of the Munich massacre. The waiter, Ahmed Bouchiki, was shot and killed in front of his pregnant wife. Several Mossad agents were arrested by Norwegian police, tried, and imprisoned. The operation was a disaster for Israeli intelligence, exposing operational methods and damaging Israel's relationship with European allies. It demonstrated that even highly capable intelligence organizations make catastrophic errors when operating under pressure and with incomplete information. The ultimate target of the Wrath of God campaign, Ali Hassan Salameh, evaded multiple assassination attempts for years. He was finally killed in January 1979 in Beirut by a car bomb planted by Mossad agents. His death came 6 years after Spring of Youth, illustrating that some targets required patience and multiple attempts. The car bomb technique was different from the direct assault method used in Spring of Youth, reflecting adaptations in Israeli operational tactics. Car bombs allowed for remote detonation and reduced the risk to Israeli operatives, but they also increased the risk of civilian casualties. The bomb that killed Salameh also killed 8 other people who happened to be near his vehicle when it detonated. The longer-term strategic impact of Operation Spring of Youth is difficult to assess. Did it deter future terrorist attacks against Israel? The evidence is mixed. Attacks continued, though some planned operations were disrupted because of the intelligence captured during the raid. Did it weaken the PLO? Temporarily, yes. The organization lost 3 experienced commanders and spent months dealing with internal paranoia and security reforms. But the PLO as a whole survived and continued operations. Did it send a message that attacking Israel would result in retaliation? Absolutely. Every Palestinian militant leader after Spring of Youth understood that Israel had the capability and willingness to strike targets anywhere. Whether that understanding led to changed behavior is less clear. Some may have been deterred. Others may have been motivated by the desire for revenge. The cycle of violence continued. Looking back 50 years later, Operation Spring of Youth remains a landmark in the history of Special.